Scale Model Basics is brought to you by HobbyZone USA, your source for hobby storage solutions, hard-to-find hobby tools, and aftermarket modeling needs.
Welcome to Scale Model Basics. I'm Tim Kidwell. Let's talk about assembling plastic model figures. Now, you might not think that there's much difference between a plastic model figure and a plastic model vehicle, but actually there are some pretty substantial differences. One, we're dealing with organic shapes with the figures rather than linear shapes, hard edges with vehicles. And the parts breakdown with figures, while maybe not as many parts, they can be confusing sometimes and just as intricate as model vehicles. So let's get into it. First, for me, what I like to do is get the instructions out and go through the sprue and mark the parts of the figure that I'm going to be building that are going to be used for that figure. In this case, I've marked all of the parts in black, and you can see that I've already removed some. If I'm going to be building multiple figures at the same time and they're going to be coming off of the same sprue, what I will do is use different colors. So I might use black and then red and then blue. Now this sprue does a really good job with separating out the parts for individual figures, but that's not always going to be the case. So I like to just do this preliminary step, and it helps me keep everything organized. Once that step is complete, the next thing to do is actually clip your parts out. So just like you would with any other model, just get the clipping. Now be careful, you don't want to be too close. And you can see that I leave a bit of that connector on the part, because we're going to clean that up in a minute. Then it's time to remove the sprue gates, or those connector points. You can use a utility knife like this one, or a sharp number 11 blade chucked in a hobby knife handle, and just gently get rid of those. Now you don't want to cut too close to the actual model, but just enough to get it down to being just a tiny nub. The other thing that you're going to want to be careful of is that you want to make sure that you are actually getting the sprue gates and not removing something that will be a detail later on. Once you're finished with cleaning up those sprue gates, what you're going to want to do is come in and completely eliminate them. And you want to start looking for any mold lines that might be on the model. So rather than using files that have hard, sharp lines on them, like this triangle file, what you want to do is get your jeweler's files that have rounded surfaces, like this half round here, this rat tail here, or you can get specifically designed circular files like these that are disposable. And I also recommend that you get yourself some sanding sponges. You don't need super fine, but you don't need super coarse either. So a range from like 280 to 600. I usually come in with a 400 because it just gives me enough of a finish that it's going to look okay underneath primer. So for something like that sprue gate, I'm just going to come in with this sponge and work that down. And it's not going to take much at all to get it to go away. And what's nice about using sponges is that they conform nicely to these details, the wrinkle of this shirt. So just go around your model then and pick up and get rid of any of those, the remnants of those sprue gates and mold seams that you find. Even though the figure is still in parts, there might be some places where a seam line is inaccessible if you're going to be using a sanding sponge or even a file. In this case right here, you can see there is a mold line that runs up behind this arm here along this figure's back. So what you can do is eliminate that by dragging the back of your knife along that line. And just gently get rid of it. You can see that line is now gone, and it should disappear underneath paint. Once all of your parts have been cleaned up to your satisfaction, it's time to start putting together your figure. Start with the main body and just go from there. What I like to do is use Tamiya thin, or extra thin, and just flow it right into the seams, right into that joint. Let capillary action take hold. And then just slowly work around the figure. Again, go slowly, and then squeeze. Make sure that cement takes effect. And remember, thin cement will flow, so just be careful while applying it because it will soften the plastic, and you will put a fingerprint in your model if you're not careful. Luckily, I appear not to have put any fingerprints in this particular model. On some figures, not all, but on some, the model will have a locator mark or a locating pin. This one up here for the head, you can see it's not incredibly substantial. This one down here for the arm is even less. However, I think with the head, we can make this one work. What you can do is put a touch of the glue, the cement, on here right now. That will begin the softening. And then you can come in with the head, put it in place, and then adjust it. Look around, make sure that it is positioned to your liking. Not too bad. And then go ahead and let that dry because it is not a substantial connector, right? There's not a lot of positive surface there. So at this point right now, there's a chance that you might, if you continue to work, you might knock it off. To prevent something like that from happening, there is an option, and we're going to use that on the arm here, and that is to pin it. To pin a part, what you're going to need is, well, a brass rod. Now, the thickness, the diameter of the rod that you choose, it matters. You want one that is substantial enough where it's going to hold the part in place without necessarily, letting it move all over. But you don't want it so thick that it's going to cause damage to the surrounding area. So this one is about 1 millimeter thick, and that's probably going to be good enough to fit up in there. So you're going to need the brass rod, and then you're going to need a micro drill bit and a pin vise to go ahead and drill that hole. So I'm going to start with the upper arm here. First, I'm just going to carve the top of that connecting point away. Then carefully drill the hole. You want to make sure that you don't drill into any detail or go so deep that you come out the other side of your part. You don't want that to happen either. And I think if I test this, that's going to be, yeah, that's going to be deep enough. When cutting your brass rod, you're going to want to cut a length that is longer than you need, okay? Use a pair of heavy snips, not the ones that you're using to snip plastic. Something that is designed for cutting metal. If you use the ones that you use for cutting plastic, there's a good chance that you'll leave a divot in your blade, and that is not something that you want. That's not taking care of your tools. So that is the length of brass that I'm going to put up into the arm there. So to do that, what I'm going to use is a bit of super glue, and then I'm going to slide that in there and let that take hold. Now obviously that is way too much arm, right? That's way too much for this little part there, but we're going to trim that. So at that point, what we need to do is prep the lower arm to accept that pin. Using the same drill bit as we did with the upper arm, just come down here and drill. I want to give myself a little bit of room to play with. So this is now the next size up, and what this is going to do is just widen that hole a little bit to give me a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to finally placing the part onto the pin. Okay. At this point, I've got the pin where I need it to be. I've got the hole where it needs to be. So I'm going to come in with just a little bit of super glue on that pin, just like we did last time. And then position the part where I want it to be. Make sure that it is as tight as it can be. Now that arm is pinned, has a good substantial joint in there, and it is connected with some super glue. And just for good measure, I'm going to come over here where it's resting on, it's supposed to be holding this strap, and cement that part too. That means it'll have a nice, good connection in two places. All that's left really is to put the last odds and ends onto the figure. In this case, the helmet, which is already on there, and then the rifle, and then a canteen. This figure went together really, really well. There are no gaps to speak of, and I just love the engineering on it. However, not all of your plastic figures are going to be like that, and you might have to use filler to get rid of some gaps. Now, thing is, on a figure like this, at 1/35 scale, the gaps are not going to be huge, so you don't need to use a lot of filler. Now, on larger figs, that may be a little bit different. You have a number of options. You can go with a water-based putty, or you can go with solvent-based putties. Water-based putties I like because they're very easy to clean up. They do shrink when you use them, so you're gonna have to probably use a couple of applications, but you can just clean them up with water and a cotton swab. With the lacquer-based putties, you're going to get probably a finer material in those putties, especially when you start sanding them down. But just be careful that when you're applying them, you don't over-apply them, because you can not only obscure details, but you can eat them away. So just be careful with those. And then once you have them, have filled your joins or any gaps, you can just go back in with a hobby knife or with your files and clean those up, and you'll have yourself a nice finished plastic model figure ready for paint. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye.